Louise is right. The issue of food waste has gone from a complete non-issue many years ago when I started campaigning on this subject. There was no media coverage. Companies didn't have any policies about food waste. They hid their food waste in bins behind their stores, locked them and sent them off to landfill. Didn't want to talk about it. Government didn't have anything to say about food waste. And the United Nations really wasn't working on it. And now, as Louis says, we've got a global goal, the UN Sustainability Goal, to halve food waste by 2030. And I've done what I can to make that happen. But clearly, what we have now is a global movement. We are pretty much everywhere, food waste warriors, whether it's grassroots organizations or big companies or governments or big environmental NGOs. Everyone's got something to say about food waste. That has happened because of us. And I believe that we, the citizens, or the consumers, as food businesses like to call us, of course, we don't just consume, we do other things as well, right? We think, we have values, and we can take actions. And those actions, I believe, are the most powerful thing that we have. And that power that we all have as consumers and citizens is, I think, comes with a degree of responsibility to use that power. And it starts, or rather, I would invite the audience today to start using that power right now. I think you're all been invited to tweet. Is that right? KFS 100? Tweet. Now, if you see something during this presentation I'm about to give that you don't like or that you do like, tweet about it. If you have a question about it, either to me or to the co-op, tweet about it. And I'm going to invite you also to express a few opinions. So stay engaged, and you can start to use your power right now to change some of the problems that we have in our food supply chain. And I'm going to start with a really obvious one that probably most of you have come across, which is this issue of cosmetic standards on fruit and vegetables. You know what I mean by that, right? Everything has to look uniform and perfect, or else it doesn't make it onto supermarket shelves. Now, I know the co-op had some trial marketing of ugly fruit and vegetables. What was it called? I'm not going to try and say that. Did you hear what she said? Yeah. And that was an opportunity for everyone to buy into the solution to the enormous problem of the cosmetic standards causing waste on farms around the world. And to share with you the kind of thing that my organization, Feedback, has been going around the world investigating, this is a trip I did recently to Peru. And Peru, of course, has become a boom horticultural export industry. And these are citrus fruits being grown for us here in Europe. This is around 1,000 tons of citrus being dumped in the desert and buried. And they're all, or they were, perfectly good. And they're being wasted because of minor cosmetic defects. Now, if you're having difficulty seeing what's wrong with these tangelos, that's kind of the point. He's showing you this minor scar on the skin. It has absolutely no impact on the quality of the fruit on the inside, no impact on the shelf life of the fruit. It just is deemed to not look perfect, and therefore does not comply with the cosmetic standards that the supermarkets in Europe, who he is growing this citrus for, it doesn't agree with their cosmetic standards. He tries, of course, to sell as much as he can on local markets, but the scale of the rejects is so great that the local markets just simply cannot absorb it all. And so it gets wasted. And the same is true across the board. Asparagus. Anyone who eats asparagus outside of basically the late spring, which is when it grows in Europe, is probably eating Peruvian asparagus. They're the fastest growing export market of asparagus in the world. And lots of farmers have got pretty rich doing this. This farmer has bought an entire desert, 10,000 hectares of it. He's put a great big hole in the ground, 100 meters deep, and he pumps water out of the ground, and he's turned the desert into his asparagus farm. It's really phenomenal. Now, the problem, of course, is that water levels in Peru are going down and down and down. Local producers can't afford the wells and the pump and the fuel that you need to get water out of the ground. And it's got so bad that they're now talking about replumbing the Amazon basin. So there's an arid western coast of Peru, then you get the Andes, and then on the other side of the Andes Mountains is the Amazon basin. And they're talking about putting a great big hole through the Andes to bring water from the Amazon to the west coast. Now, you can argue about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Local farmers are making money out of this export crop, etc. But the one thing we can surely all agree that if you're going to do it, 15 to 20% of the asparagus that are being grown should not be being wasted because, as in this picture, the flowers are too thin or too open, or the asparagus is crooked, or whatever it is. All of that is good food. He's leaving it in the field to rot because it doesn't comply with our fussy cosmetic standards. Same is true of these white onions. Peruvians don't eat white onions. They eat ceviche with the purple onions. These are grown just for export. Anything that isn't perfect is just dumped in the desert. So that is one of the major causes of food waste in the fruit and vegetable sector. And I've just been having really interesting conversations with the buyers and the suppliers of Coop about how one could go about tackling that. Of course, it's not just an overseas problem. Local producers here are against the same problem. These are carrots being grown in Britain, and these carrots are being wasted because they're too long to fit into the stupid packets. Now, anyone here got a vegetable garden, or maybe parents, they grew up with a vegetable garden? Anyone kind of grown up in a place? And you competed with your next door neighbor to grow the longest carrot, didn't you? That was a good thing. Too long, they get rejected. So it's an obviously stupid area of food waste, and one that I don't think anyone really agrees with. So as an organization, we identified this as a really key problem, not the only problem in food waste, but one that everyone could get behind. And we picked up on one particularly egregious area where this was happening, and that was in Kenya. We visited suppliers in Kenya, and all of the green beans grown in Kenya, I ate green beans for lunch. It probably came from Kenya. I don't think they're growing them in this country at the moment. Maybe they are. The season is pretty much over in most of Europe. Anyone like these green beans here? Show of hands. You buy these green beans? Okay, so there's a thing about these green beans, right? We all agree it's got a little stalky thing at the top, right? And you cut that off. No one eats the stalk, okay? But then at the other end, there's a kind of wispy little tail. And some people eat them and some people don't. Can I have a show of hands who does eat the wispy tail if it's there? Quite a few people. But a lot of the beans we found in supermarkets had both ends cut off. And not only that, they were cut off right, if you look carefully, they're not cut off where the bean is getting thinner. It's right where the bean is still at its fattest point. And what we found is that essentially the packets that the beans were having to be fitted into were exactly 9 centimeters long. And the beans didn't know they had to be 9 centimeters long. They grew all sorts of different lengths, 14 centimeters, 12. On average, 15 to 20% of the bean was being cut off. And these are the beans that have already won the competition of being the straightest, greenest, not lumpiest, thinnest, perfect beans. All of the other ones, the ones that are curvy or too thin or too fat, they're wasted on the farm, like 30% before it even gets to this point. And then 15 to 20% right at that last minute. We thought, this is totally crazy. And not only did we find waste owned to cosmetic standards, we also found farmers like this lady who didn't harvest their crop at all because the order that they had grown the crop to was cancelled. She's already paid money for fertilizer and labor to grow this. She's farming 2 acres on the outskirts of Mount Kenya. This is right on the edge of the habitat of lions and elephants, and our agricultural system is eating the habitat of wildlife. We've lost 25% of all wild spaces globally in the last 25 years, and by current trends, there will be no wild places left at all on planet Earth within a century, and that's mainly because of the extension of food production into wild habitat. So we're buying into this problem, and 100%, these are mange tout. We call them mange tout. Do you call them that? They're these like peas, and you eat the whole thing. So it's mange tout, which is the French for eat everything. Ironically, not a single one of these beans will actually be manged. They're all being wasted because of an order cancellation. And these ladies are doing the same thing. They're destroying an entire crop of basil because the order was cancelled. These people are day labourers. They work for less than $2 a day. And when they get an order cancellation, they don't get paid, or they get paid half wages. And as they explained to us on camera, that means that they can't send their kids to school, and when they don't get paid, they sometimes can't feed their kids. I don't think a single person that I know thinks that white men going to Africa and getting black people to work for us and not paying them and going into debt and going hungry is okay. So my challenge to the food retailers of this world, who are the real apex of power in our food system, they really control a lot of what happens further up the supply chain. They have the power to change the policies, to go and investigate whether their policies are causing this kind of waste and this kind of suffering, and to change their policies where possible. So in the UK, this became such a problem that we actually passed a law in 2013 saying that supermarkets, if they cause a supplier to waste food, they have to share the cost of it and not just offload all the cost onto their suppliers. So I'd just like a show of hands. People are listening here. Who thinks that this practice is totally wrong? I mean, that's a bit of a leading question, but seriously, come on. Who thinks that this shouldn't be happening, basically, in our supply chains? We shouldn't have to pay for that. And so go a step further. Who thinks it would be a good idea for the retailers to take responsibility to go and audit their supply chains to find out whether or not this is happening in their supply chains? Okay, a good show of hands. And one step further, who thinks that it's the government's responsibility to legislate to say that you're not allowed to do this, that if you do this, you have to pay? Okay, so can I have a show of hands of anyone who disagrees fundamentally with any of those proposals? Okay, everyone thinks it's a good idea, or at least doesn't think it's a bad idea. The supermarkets will do that if you tell them to. If you say, we're not going to give you our money, we're going to change our policies, and or we're going to change our buying practices, either go to one of your competitors who is doing better on this front, or maybe go to a local farmer's market where you can get seasonal produce and not buy into these really invisible supply chains. As an organization, we can make change by kind of making arguments and making points and using rhetoric. But I believe that we will really win this battle if we can have a better party than the corporations who are eating nature and turning it into cash. So one of the things that we do is launch massive celebratory feasts where we embody the solution to this problem, namely eating and enjoying food rather than throwing it away. Feeding the 5,000 is one of the campaign events that we use to reach out to the public on the nature of this problem and feed 5,000 people for free with food that otherwise would have been wasted. And really try to bring all the organizations in any particular country or region together to celebrate the fact that everyone together can make a big noise about this, get into the press, and amplify the existing public outcry there is about this. And that's what makes the supermarkets and the governments jump into action. Make as much noise and have as much fun as you possibly can trying to solve the problem. So we have these big festive occasions, and we've done that now in 45 cities around the world. We've also organized this thing called Disco Soup, which is a bit like the same thing, but with music, where everyone's kind of dancing and preparing the food together. This is the first Disco Soup in Africa. We did it in Nairobi with all the food in those supply chains that I was just showing you a second ago. So the waste that our supermarkets are causing over there. And we campaigned particularly on the green beans, but generally about the whole issue. We took the evidence we'd gathered to some of the supermarkets and said, look, this is what's happening, and it's in the press, so you might want to go and do something about it before we damage the reputation of your company by associating it with these practices that all of your customers undoubtedly disagree with. And we were doing the same kind of campaigning across the UK, where in addition to doing these big feasts, we also take volunteers to fields and harvest crops that are being left there to be wasted and give them to the charities that feed hungry people. It's called the Gleaning Network. We've got more than 10,000 volunteers. And when a farmer contacts us and says, oh, you know, I've got a whole field full of lettuces or whatever, come and get them before they go to waste. We send out teams of volunteers, have a great day, as you can see, and learn about the whole food system. And obviously, it's a great opportunity to take media along and highlight the root causes of the problem as well as using this food to feed hungry people. What we're trying to do is drive public opinion to essentially threaten supermarkets that they're going to lose business if they don't tackle this problem. So we end up with surveys that show this kind of thing. And as I say, that's when the supermarkets start to listen to what we have to say. And sure enough, Tesco, which is our biggest supermarket in the United Kingdom, came back to us a few months after our first visit to them with all the evidence that I've just shown you. And they said, OK, we've changed the packaging. It's more flexible plastic, so it's more accommodating to different length beans. And we're only going to take the top off the beans and not the tail. Now, we thought, great, we've got halfway. We went to visit some of the suppliers in that supply chain in Kenya, and that single policy, which happened overnight, cut waste by 30%. For one producer, that meant she had 70,000 euros worth of extra beans as a result of that single change. And if you extend that saving across the export of just this one vegetable from Kenya to Europe, it amounts to around $20 million, which is 0.04% of the entire Kenyan economy. So big benefit from some tiny little tweak. Imagine what we could do if we took that principle and applied it throughout our supply chains. Significant changes would be incurred. And then literally about 3 months ago, Tesco went the next step, and they now don't trim the beans at all. And not only did that cut waste again in their supply chain, they found that customers preferred it. And because they weren't cutting the vegetable, the shelf life was extended, because it's where you cut it that you create the damage that then goes to rotten beans. So everyone benefited. Now, as I said, this is just one of the big problems in the supply chain. But what we're really trying to get at is, well, a third of all the world's food is being wasted, and most rich countries have a problem where we eat more than is good for us, and that's creating another public health crisis. And yet we keep on hearing this claim that we need to double food production or increase it by 60%, depending on who you're listening to, by 2050, because there are going to be more people, and so we've got to somehow produce more food. Now, the problem with this claim is not only it's not true, but secondly, the way in which we're producing food at the moment is the single biggest negative impact we have on the planet. So if we do way more of it, without any scientific, plausible scenario that we're going to be able to do it without just extending the agricultural frontier further and further into the world's remaining places, we're just accelerating the very problem, deforestation, global warming, soil erosion, extraction of water, etc., only we're going to double it. Now, we're already doing too much of it, so I would argue that this claim, which is really what the Monsantos, the Coca-Colas, the Cargills, the supermarkets of this world want us to believe, and is unfortunately now being endorsed by even the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. This claim is not just like the recipe for destroying nature, it's the single biggest threat to long-term food security. So we have to use food waste and its campaigning to stand up to the productionist ideology that just wants more of the same. Why do they want it? They want it because it's their way of making profit, and that's what they're designed to do. But it's up to us to say, we need a food system that is actually part of the solution. We can do food in a way that actually can take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into soils. We can do food in a way that creates habitat, that preserves forests, that replenishes water supplies. Food production can be the single biggest tool we have to solve all the global problems that we have, including public health and the 800 million people who don't have enough food to eat. It isn't going to change unless we demand it. I'm going to skip over this, but basically it shows the data that I mentioned a second ago, that all rich countries already have between 1.5 and 2 times the amount of food that they actually need. So the idea that we need to double food production to solve that problem is ludicrous. Louise asked me to talk about one thing that gives me hope. And I'll start by one thing that has really depressed me throughout the years. I visited a sandwich factory back in 2008 and found that they have this loaf of bread and they threw away the crust, the last slice, and the first slice inside the crust. So they were throwing away 4 slices for every single loaf of bread that they were using, because the supermarket they were supplying said that we didn't want to make sandwiches out of the end piece. You don't do sliced bread so much in Sweden, do you? Do you? Okay, can I have a show of hands? Who lives in a household where if you have a loaf of bread like this, the crust is consumed by somebody? Okay, so people want it, and there's a kind of mismatch there. Anyway, 13,000 slices of fresh bread every single day. I was like, come on, you can make crusty sandwiches or you can do something. There was kind of a success here. We said to them, instead of paying £80 a tonne to drive this to an anaerobic digester, I've got like 1 more minute, right, Louise? I think my time is nearly up, but I've got a couple more seconds. Instead of driving this to an anaerobic digester where it's get turned into renewable energy, which is what they were doing, I mean, this kind of, you've heard of biogas and anaerobic digestion, where they turn food into energy, and you've probably been told this is a really good thing. Well, it's better than landfill, but you only recover around 1% of the energy that went into growing the food by turning it into renewable energy. You don't recover any of the water, any of the impacts on nature, biodiversity loss, etc. You don't recover anything. It's a slightly better waste management system. So we said, look, at least instead of paying to get rid of this, you could find a livestock farmer, and we found a livestock farmer 2 miles down the road who started to buy this bread to feed his cattle for £20 a tonne. And they saved around £100,000 in waste disposal costs a year as a result of this change. It took them about 3 weeks to implement it. So it was always kind of, well, it was better than nothing, but it's still pretty bad. You know, it's perfectly good bread. So the thing that gives me hope is that my latest initiative is to turn it into beer. I set up this company called Toast Ale, and we get waste bread from exactly this kind of place, and we brew it into really good quality craft ale. And 100% of the profits from Toast Ale go to the charity I founded or other affiliated charities around the world. We have only just started earlier this year. We've already got our first franchisee in Iceland, another food waste campaigning organization, and we've got lots of inquiries from all over the world. We're basically matching up the craft brewing movement globally with the food waste movement globally to solve a problem of bread waste and generate money for charities doing this excellent work. And the great thing about this is that, you know, the bottle is a way of communicating to people about the whole problem of food waste and what we need to do. And it's so easy. Instead of buying Stella Artois or Budweiser or what are the commercial beers you drink in Sweden, this kind of tasteless beer that just pays money to corporates that do goodness knows what it, you can buy this. It's so easy. And only a matter of time before we're in Scandinavia. And so then the question was, is it really any good? I say it's really good. The first ever bottles, do you know who this guy is? First ever bottle ever drunk is being drunk in this photograph. I had not tasted it myself. I was on television with this guy, and they tasted it. I was like, please don't screw up your face in disgust. He was like, this is blooming good. And I thought, oh, well, he would. But then we had some serious beer sommeliers and stockists, and they tasted it and said, this is an amazing beer. It's got unusual profile, caramel, really substantial, it's wholesome. And so kind of, for me, I said, if we're going to take on this corporate system that eats nature and exudes cash into the hands of, I don't know, a few. I know the co-op is slightly different. You all get the money, right? You get the money that they make. You're the members. So that's pretty good, sort of. Hands up who last got a paycheck from the co-op. Okay, a couple. Anyway, I don't know where the money goes, but it no doubt is being put to good purpose. So this is a way of putting the money into a place that really is doing excellent work. And it's a way of saying, look, if we're going to change the world, we've got to have a great time doing it, bring people on board, have a better party. And I will end there, because, you know, my time is up. Thank you very much.
Great, Tristam. Thank you so much. You are really inspiring us here in Sweden, and I think that we will start making this toast beer out of bread that is other wasted. That must be a very magnificent thing for us in Sweden to do as well. I think we have some tweets here.
Oh, great. Excellent.
Can't companies ordering food from farmers and want to cancel the order arrange a transport of the food for people in need in Kenya, for example?
Absolutely. And one of the really great impacts of, in fact, the picture I showed you of the disco soup in Kenya, we invited the FAO, we invited the World Food Programme and the United Nations Environment Programme to this event, and a bunch of agronomists, and a bunch of farmers and producers, and a bunch of the members of the public and the press. And the purpose of a thing like this is to have fun, to brainstorm, to come up with solutions, and obviously, feeding local people who don't have enough food with this food is kind of like obvious, right? There's a couple of problems. Kenyans don't eat green beans or sugar snap peas or mange tout. They call this mzunga food, it's white man's food. And literally, the farmers who are wasting it, they do not look at it as food. They look at it as cash on a bush. And kind of why should they? We don't eat Kenyan food. We have different food cultures. You have to respect that. Having said that, we're doing a lot of, there's people on the ground. We had a chef there who was all about integrating this kind of ingredient into the local diet, into familiar meals. And there's now a program on the ground with the World Food Programme, feeding around 80,000 people a day, integrating these waste vegetables into the food. So that is part of the solution. Wouldn't it be better if we didn't waste it in the first place as well?
Could you just tell us a very short sentence about Rockefeller Foundation's big launch, funding $130 million into trying to cut waste in Africa, some African countries?
Yeah, so Rockefeller Foundation, big foundation, they wanted to tackle food waste. They wanted to know where they should go. Through a long consultation period, they decided going to sub-Saharan Africa and helping farmers there reduce waste on their farms by investing in the kind of really obvious and basic, this is not a short sentence, is it? Agricultural infrastructure that we all take for granted, like grain silos, would be a good place to start. But they also funded my organization, Feedback, to do the supply chain investigations that we've been doing around the world to find how essentially retailer policies in Europe and America contribute to the problem of food waste, even in the global south, and paid us to do our Feeding the 5,000 campaigns across the USA. So just in the last few weeks, my colleagues have been in Denver, in Colorado, in Portland, in Maine, in a whole lot of places, kicking off the food waste revolution there and really trying to drive change throughout the industry.
And you are touring with this Feeding the 5,000. I told you in the taxi coming here that we are feeding the 2,000 in Sweden. I don't know if anybody of you have been to our restfest. We have had restfest på Medborgarplatsen och vi har haft restfest i Södertälje för i alla fall 2,000 personer som vi då lagar pizza till av mat som annars skulle slängas. Så det tänker vi fortsätta med. And you have inspired us.
I'm glad to hear that. Now, one of the things that interested me when Louise told me about this is the first year, did you already say this? It was really easy to collect the waste from all the supermarkets and feed 2,000 people. The third year, it was really difficult. And that's very encouraging. It's anecdotal evidence to suggest that stocking and forecasting got so much better over that period that they didn't have enough waste to feed that many people. That's the entire purpose of what we do. But what I've said to the co-op today is that kind of anecdotal evidence is useful, but it's not enough. What we've successfully got the supermarkets in the UK to do is firstly measure across their entire business how much food they're wasting, and then most importantly, to report publicly how much food they're wasting. If you are a food bank or a food charity trying to collect food to feed hungry people, if you're a government trying to come up with food policies, if you are a social entrepreneur like myself and you want to launch a beer that is using waste bread, the first thing we all want to know is how much food is being wasted, what kind of food, where, and in what state is it? And then we can all build the solutions, because no single company is going to do it by themselves. The first thing the retailers need to do is report how much food they waste publicly and transparently. Can I have a show of hands? Again, a bit of a leading question. Who thinks the co-op and its competitors should be reporting how much food they waste? That's
of course, and we are already starting to pressure for that.
And who thinks that it should be actually government legislation that all supermarkets are obliged to do so? Bravo.
Okay, why not? Thank you so much,
I'm going to come back next year.
Yes.
And I want to know the answer.
Thank you so much, Tristram. I know that your taxi is waiting. You're going to London and then to Tokyo. What are you going to do in Tokyo?
Oh, God. It's one of
Just
global,
very short, because it's waiting for you.
It's a global elite cult called the Young Global Leaders, brought together by the World Economic Forum, who's the organization that do Davos. And I don't really know. I'm going to go and talk to a lot of people. Last time I went there, you saw on the quote, actually, this is why I'm going. They believe that we need to, how to provide the world with 60% more food by 2050. That's their agenda. They're sponsored by Coca-Cola. And I made a presentation last year that called this global priority of theirs an insidious lie. And obviously, I didn't make any friends. I like to rub people up the wrong way and then try to charm them into actually solving the problem. I hope I've done at least part of that job today. Some of the key co-op team are here, and I do rub people up the wrong way, but hopefully in a constructive way that then will drive change. So when I come back in a year, yeah, I'm quite hopeful.
And you know that Tristam is coming back already in December because he's invited to the Nobelmiddagen. Off you go.
Thank you, Louise.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.